Let me give away my recipe for making face frames. For me, this has evolved over years, and it's a way that lets me kick out face frames pretty darn fast, and it's something that people are asking me about pretty frequently. So here we are. You're about to get it all. Here's what I do to start with. Step one, your face frame material goes to a planer or a surface sander to get the faces flat. So if you have a big enough jointer, you can start with face jointing, then go to a planer or a sander. But the bottom line is we want to make sure that before we get to the next step, we've got the two faces on our face frame stock flat. Next thing I do is go to a jointer. And there's an X on these boards that indicates the jointed edge. So here's one of the things that I think I do differently from a lot of other people that makes my process go faster. I joint one edge. Once that one edge is jointed, rip, 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 rip. I'm not going back and forth to the jointer all the time. You're going to see how I deal with that sawn edge in just a little bit. So I have one jointed edge on each piece. That gives me a nice straight edge to go against the rip fence. Rip fence, we're going to set that to a 1/16 of an inch more than what you want for your face frame size. Before I do that, let's talk blade. I very commonly have on my saw a 40-tooth alternate top bevel blade. If that's what you own, that'll work okay for our face frame stock. Here, I've got a 24-tooth dedicated rip blade. This comes down to allowing me to feed my material more quickly. So, no such thing as a free lunch. What's the negative? The negative is that this 24-tooth blade isn't going to give me quite as clean an edge as my 40-tooth alternate top bevel, but it's clean enough, it cuts fast, and we're going to do a step where I clean up the sawn edge anyway. So that blade is going to work fine for me. Then, come to the fence, set that for 1/16 of an inch more than your final face frame size. Now, it's just go, 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 rip, rip, rip. Before we do that, let's talk about length of pieces. At this stage of the game, these parts are rough cut to be about 2 inches longer than my finished face frame pieces. So 2 inches longer than my stiles, 2 inches longer than my rails, all the way through here. So they're just rough cut to length. Make sure there's enough material there. That takes care of the ripping part of the process. Next thing we want to do is deal with the sawn edges and get those cleaned up. Next stop, planer. And what we're going to do is send all of our pieces through on edge. That's going to clean up the saw marks on both edges, and it's going to get them all to uniform size because that's what planers are so good at. A couple things usually confuse people a little bit here. One is the idea that we can send a piece on edge. Here's what I find. With 3/4 inch stock, which is what I have here, I can send stuff through that's up to 3 inches high or wide before it gets to where it's too tippy, and we're not going to get a good result. The other thing is don't just send a piece through. We can gang a bunch of these together like this, send them all at one time. So back to the idea of this is a process that goes really, really quickly for me. This is part of the reason. When we get here, instead of trying to edge joint each of these to clean them up, we can clean them all up with a planer. Back to this jointer idea, I would much rather send these 1.5 inch pieces on edge through the planer than joint them from a safety perspective. This is so much easier, so much safer to do here at the planer. Now I mentioned a surface sander earlier. If what you have in your shop is a surface sander, a drum sander, then we could be doing all of this step at the sander instead of the planer. But we're going to send all of them through in groups, just like that, clean them up really quickly. This is a scenario where I'm not as concerned about them being a perfect dimension as I am about them all being the same. So I've said a bunch of times, you've maybe heard it, consistency is often more important than accuracy. This is an application of that. I want to make sure that all of my face frame pieces are exactly the same width. It should be 1.5 inches when they're done, but if I miss that a little bit, as long as they're all the same, we're going to be okay. How do we know when we're done? Two things. All the saw marks have to be gone, and we hit the dimension that we're after on the face frame. And like I said earlier, my bigger concern is making sure that they're clean and all those edges are perfect, more so than is this the perfect dimension? Because every one of these pieces is now exactly the same width. One more stop on the face frame tour, and then these pieces are going to be ready to get turned into a face frame. We have a lot of pieces here, but here at the miter saw, we are only going to make 2 cuts. Our goal here is to square one end of each piece. And then from there, you're ready to use the face frame parts at the cabinet to start deriving their final exact length. 2 cuts because here's the way this works. Take a gang of pieces, bring them under the blade, cut them all at one time. Now, a while ago at the table saw, I said all of these parts are currently about 2 inches longer than what I need for their finished length. So when I come here to make this roughing cut to square up one end, I have about 1 inch to mess with here, and then another inch will come off the other end when I take them to their final length. So that gives you a pretty liberal look here, a pretty liberal amount of wood that you can take off. You can put all the parts like this, which is they're standing here on edge. You can cut them like this, where they're all sitting here on their faces. Whatever's the easiest way for you to handle a big group of parts is the way for you to do this. Let that saw stop before you lift, because if the blade's still spinning, when it comes past these little guys, it bounces them around the shop. Don't go anywhere yet. On that cut end, take a pencil and just drag it across. Now, when you go to cut these to their final length, that mark tells you that's your square end. The absence of a mark tells you that's not your square end. So you want to make sure that you keep that freshly cut end. Same thing to the other group. Final step, cut them to their finished length. This is such a quick way to process face frame parts. Hope you got a little bit of good information out of this, and it's going to help expedite your process, expedite your technique the next time you have a boatload of face frame pieces to make.